Good morning. We are reviewing the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. It's the second time we're learning this text. First time we learned it, part of the flow from the beginning. But because the Rebbe Rashab did not conclude Hemshech Ayin Beis, and there were many themes and questions left unanswered, so we went back to review and study the source material where the Ayin Beis is based upon, namely the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe and Mittler Rebbe, Mika Hashem Elokeinu Magbi L'Shevis. And now, informed by that, which we learned for quite a few months, we're coming back to understand Ayin Beis in that larger context. So we are up to page 1381 in Hemshech Ayin Beis. And briefly, what we're learning here is about Torah. In the context of the central theme of Ayin Beis, which is the interface between the divine and existence, between transcendence and immanence, meaning transcendent divine that's beyond us, and that should become integrated into our lives, into our beings. So overall, the Rebbe Rashab explained that there are two ways you do achieve that. One is from the bottom up, which means we initiate, we generate. Tefillah is the classic way we do that, through a prayer, through tefillah, which is initiated by the mispal, by the person who's praying. And the second way is mamay lamata, from the top down, and that's primarily through Torah. Torah was given to us from above. God gave us His Torah, and that Torah illuminates our lives. And we need both, because we want it to be integrated within our system, but we also want an experience that's on God's terms, which is what Torah provides. And they both come together in so many different ways, as we've been discussing at length. The example he gave in volume 2, that when two people want to meet, one is on top of the mountain, one is on the bottom of the mountain, there are two ways you could do it. The one at the bottom can climb up, the one at the top can come down, or they can meet halfway. And he explains the advantage of each one of them, which we've again reviewed many times. When it's from the top down, it's more in the terms of the one that's above. So it's more, let's call it more purely divine. When it's from the bottom up, it's more on our terms. But on the other hand, it's more integrated, more internalized, because it's coming from within us. Like we say, Adam reitze b'kav shaleh, yesem etisha kavim shel chavere. A person desires one measure through their own effort more than 9 measures they receive as a gift from another. So even though 9 is higher than 1, like mamay lamata is a greater gilui than mamat lamayla, but mamat lamayla is yours, and it becomes part of who you are. It's internalized. And many more aspects to this mamay lamata, mamat lamayla interface and interactions. But here we're talking primarily now Torah. But in Torah itself, because there's so much overlap, there's also mamay lamata, mamat lamayla, even in Torah. And that's where Mikra is so, a Mishnah, Talmud come into play. Talmud is much more of a mamata lamayla. Mikra is much more mamay lamata, because that's what God gave us, the words of Torah. The written Torah is exactly every letter, exactly as Hashem said it to Moshe, and Moshe then passed it on. Then there's Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Sheba'al Peh is already the understanding of Torah Shebiksav. So there already is getting into our understanding of it. So first, the level of Mishnah is still a mamay lamata, but it's beginning to come down into Gilui, in Chagas, Mides, which define the halacha as the structure of the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 orders of Mishnah. And even more so, the most mamat lamayla in Torah is Talmud. Because Talmud doesn't even have the Gilui, the illuminating element of Chochma law of the written Torah, shining and illuminating into the Mishnah, Ish mi pi ish, which they received, also Rabbeinu HaKadosh received from all the generations back to Moshe. Now they're struggling to try to understand what the Mishnah is, so it's even a more mata lamayla within Torah itself. The goal is to illuminate, but now you need birur. As we were discussing, right through the middle of discussing the birur, the clarity that the sages in the Talmud achieve. So that clarity is what he calls as bina compared to Chochma. And first, obviously, it's just achieving clarity in a place of darkness. But then he went further and said, in the process of finding clarity in a place where there was lack of clarity, you actually reach deeper into the core essence of this Chochma itself. You're going back to the so-called the source code, or the mouth of the well, the source where Chochma came from in the first place, which is in Keser and Etzema Chochma, as he calls it. That's the process that happens when you're going to try to clarify something that's unclear, as we again learned at length. And that's what we just finished learning on the end of page 1381. The last class, it's the levels of superconscious and conscious, and how we go deeper into the source of where Chochma is. And obviously through our exertion and our effort, we're able to dig deeper. But there's more to be said on this, and we're going to learn it more now as we go along here. So bottom line is, it's one Torah. There's not, God forbid, more than one Torah. It's one Torah, Torah. But in Torah itself, because Torah is meant to interact and to engage with us, there are levels in Torah. And in general, it's Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud. Now, I'm going to obviously elaborate on this a lot more when we get back to the Maimer Mik Hashem Elokeinu, but I will say that when you learn the Maimer in Torah from the Alter Rebbe, and then and the beer, the explanation of the Alter Rebbe, and then the lengthy, elaborate, over 70 pages from the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer that we learned, you'll see there, especially in Torah, you'll see the mention of Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud a few times. Just briefly, he says it. And the truth is, when you learn the Maimer on its own, it's not so clear why is he mentioning it. But now, when we're learning now the Ayin Beis, and we explain Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud in detail, it actually helps us tremendously understand why he's bringing Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud in those Maimarim. I mean, in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, it's a little more elaborate, but the Alter Rebbe's Maimer is very brief, but now makes sense, because the whole point of Torah is ultimately not just Mikra, it's bringing the Torah into Mishnah, and then furthermore into Talmud. The difference between Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, as he cites there. Just wanted to point it out in case you want to look into it, you'll see. But as I said, I'd rather talk about that after we finish his explanation here, then we'll go back and connect it with the Torah and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer and the whole picture. But right now, in the bigger, in context, on page 1350, he started with Torah. He went from Torah into understanding their mitzvah of Torah, Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, but then came a long explanation to understand it with Hariyah, with the eyesight. But to understand Hariyah, he introduced the two other forms of Makabel, Levana, the moonlight, and the luminous stone. We're going to get back to that in a few pages. On 1386, you're going to get back to the three levels. Right now, we're still explaining the process of Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, and now we're in the thick of Talmud. What Talmud does, basically what the scholars do when they don't have the clarity, how they work, what the mechanics and the dynamics are to find clarity in a place of no clarity or lack of clarity. Like he said, Nesmayat HaLevovis, Miyut HaSeichel, all the different things that happen as the Gilui of Chochmei law from Matan Torah gets diminished, especially after the generation of the Mishnah of the Tanoim. So that's where we're at the bottom of page 1381. And I'm going to continue now from the bottom here. I'm going to explain now this process of the clarity that the Chachamim achieve as they try to understand Torah. Now, by extension, of course, this affects us as well. So here's another interesting point that needs to be emphasized, and that is Torah is not just a static, it's not just a self-contained entity, is the right word I should have used. Not a self-contained entity. Torah interacts with the person. We, the layman, have Torah. So even though it's true Torah is given to us, min hashamayim, God gave us his Torah. My Matan Torah. However, he gave us Torah in a way that we should learn it. Even Mikra, we read Mikra. Mikra is also being read by us. 3 times a week, we read Pasha, we read a whole Pasha every Shabbos, Mondays and Thursdays. We study Mikra. Even if it doesn't have that whole clarity and the whole elaboration in Mishnah and Talmud, but Mikra is also meant for, but Chumash and Mikra for a child to learn, and we learn Mikra. Obviously, Mishnah engages more our intellect because it explains the Mikra and breaks it down, the details and the reasoning behind it. and Talmud even more so. So what is critical to understand that even with the Momayl Lamat of Torah, it is interacting with us. And we need Torah. That's why we're going to be, as we're going to learn, and we have learned already. That's why there's a Moshe Rabbeinu in the first place. If Hashem wanted to just give the Torah, he could have just given the Torah. Just like he bestows upon us lachem min hashamayim, man from heaven, or the rain for that matter. But he gave it to us through people. Moshe kibul Torah Sinai. Moshe received it, and Moshe learned it. So he's learning Hashem's Torah. So Torah is interacting with the human being. The difference is tefillah is initiated by us. When we daven, especially al pi daraisa, tefillah is when you have a need. When you need something, you pray. If you don't have a need, there's no mitzvah to pray. Mitzvah daraisa. Later, the Chacham, the Rabbanon added that there's prayer also the Rabbanon, and there's other parts of the prayer, not just our needs. There's the thank yous that we say and the preparations and so on. But the point being is that tefillah is initiated from below. Torah is initiated from above, but it doesn't mean it doesn't engage with us. It absolutely does. That's why Torah le b'shamayim Torah is not in heaven. And Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, explain to the malachim, the angels who claim the Torah as their own, because they said it belongs to us in heaven. Hashem said to Moshe, explain to them. And Moshe explained that Torah is given dafka to earth, with his mitzrayim, with his parents, with his temptations. And of course, as I said, limadat Torah. So it is we, the sages and the Jews, the neshamas in general that come down below that study Torah. And that interaction is what we're really discussing here. So Mikra, true, is compared to Mishnah and Talmud, is less engaging with our minds, but it's still engaging to some extent. Talmud is most engaging. And of course, the generations after Talmud we'll learn about soon. Just as the concealment becomes deeper, obviously, you need more exertion to understand. That's why you have, like he said, Pirush and a Pirush ala Pirush. He brought from the Shalah. You have the Gemara, then you have the Rashi on Gemara, and then you have the commentaries on Rashi. At this point today, we have commentary upon commentary upon commentary, probably 10 layers and levels for sure. You have the Ge'inim, you have the Rabbanos Savaroi, then you have the Ge'inim, then you have the Rishenim and the Achrenim and the Achrenim, which all goes all the way till this day. So when we learn today a piece of Torah and we try to understand it, what we're doing is basically this process of trying to find clarity where there's no clarity. When you go to a Rav and ask him a question because you're not sure, is this kosher or not kosher? What's the din? I have a partner, we have a disagreement. I mean, basically all bitter halachas that we engage with in our daily lives is all about birur halacha. Exactly, birur, what Torah comes to tell us. So this isn't just about the Gemara. The Gemara, Talmud, is the body that really takes from Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud. But Talmud ultimately going to include the entire process of clarifying everything in Torah. So there's an engagement going on between the Torah and the one who learns Torah, which is, of course, each one of us. But he's still speaking here in the stage of the Amirayim of the Talmud itself. And from that, we'll soon be able to extrapolate and understand what happens in the generations after that. Okay, so with that, I'm going to continue reading and learning now. The next section is going to talk a lot more about this engagement between the Torah and the one who learns the Torah, and how that one who learns the Torah is discovering deeper elements in the Chochma law of Torah. Okay. If anyone has any questions, by all means. Not, we'll continue reading right now, learning inside here. Of course, what we go away from all of this is a very powerful and comprehensive understanding what Torah really is. Matter of fact, I remember I once gave a class on this section of Ayin Beis, not in this series that we're doing together. I gave a talk somewhere, and I went through what Torah is based on Chassidus, and there were people there who did not learn Chassidus before, and it was like quite extraordinary, the impact, because Torah we all know is a holy thing. Torah, Hashem's Torah. We dance with it on Simchas Torah. We cherish it. We value it. We stand up for it. I mean, the Torah is Torah. But when you learn it in the context of Chassidus, you suddenly realize It's more than just a holy Torah. It's a whole, should I say, besides being a gift, it's a whole divine entity that enters into a world that on its own, without Torah, there's no direction, no clarity at all. I mean, we could come up with something, moral laws and ethical laws that humans can conceive of. Like the Gemara says, we can learn without the Torah, God forbid, we can learn tznius, modesty from a cat, etc. But the real clarity of finding truth in this world, the way he explains it in these pages, is really unbelievable. It gives you a whole nother take and appreciation of what Torah really is. So with that, let's continue. Bottom of page 1381. The text, if you want to follow along, can be found at ayinbeis.com. The pages were scanned there. And here we go. Ubira inyanhu. So what's he explaining? If you look at the lines before, he's explaining how Talmud, through kushis v'stiris, through questions and contradictions, which is Helen v'cheshach, and comes to answer by digging deeper. Basically, to revealing truth in a place where initially it's dark and unclear. And that's mamshich from Helam u'mokir ha'chochma k'moshi b'mkeira shelamayla mebchinas hagili. And the process of doing so, you're reaching into the Helam, into the source. As I said, the source code, if you wish, the source material, which is higher than Gili. In Mishnah, it's Gili HaChochma. It also originates, as I explained in the last class, from the highest levels. But there, you don't need to dig into those highest levels. Mishnah is a Gili of that place, and the Tanoim, especially Rabbeinu HaKodesh, until the Rabbeinu HaKodesh, the Baalei HaMishnah, had that clarity. But when you don't have that clarity, then you have no choice, but you have to dig. Be able to get that clarity, you need to resolve questions and contradictions. That deliberation, what we called earlier was bina, is what bina adds to chochma. That depth. So it's revealing chochma even in a place where you don't have that clarity initially. Ubira inyan. And what's the explanation of this? The Hine Omer Azal, he brings from Sanhedrin, Kuvav Amud Beis, 106b, on the pasuk Ayeh Sefer. The pasuk, Ayeh Sefer. Where is the scribe? It's a verse. So the Gemara says, scribe is referring to the scribes of the Torah, those that read and teach Torah. Shesefrim kol ha'eser shebetorah. Why is it called a sefer? So sefer, most of them say sefer means he writes down, but sefer also comes from number, the word mispar. That they're precise. They are. We call it wordsmiths, if you wish. They are like precision of every letter and every word in the Torah. That means they delve into it and they're aware of not just the number of how many letters there are, but it means that it's like when you really value something, you know every detail of it. Like a parent knows how many children they have all the time. So the same thing here. But Amr Azal and Azal say, Arevim alai divrei sofrim yesem miyena shel Torah. Medrash, it says that the divrei sofrim, that's when we say divrei sofrim. So divrei sofrim literally means the words of the scribe, but divrei sofrim is another word for divrei chachamim or divrei rabbanon. So when you say something is medivrei sofrim, medivrei, when it's Torah shebiksav, we don't call it divrei sofrim. That's not from the sofrim, from the scribes, from the sages. That's Torah shebiksav, it's a dvar Hashem. The divrei sofrim, when you say a mitzvah medivrei sofrim, and other such expressions. So the Medrash says, arevim alai, arevim from the word sweet, that the words of the sofrim, of the scribes, are sweeter up to me than the wine of Torah itself, of Torah shebiksav. Let's make this clear. What he's saying here, it's sweeter. This doesn't mean it's a higher level. It means there's something about it that has advantage over Torah shebiksav. He's going to explain why shortly. But that's an expression, a medrash. Now he's going to explain what that means. So obviously a mitzvah medivrei sofrim does not have the same intensity, does not have the same magnitude as a mitzvah midat Torah. You can't, example, Chanukah and Purim are divrei Sofer. So though they're obviously today mitzvahs, but they're not the same level as, let's say, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, which from that Isa. And yet they have something in them that's arevim alai, that is sweeter to me, alai, in our approach to it. So he's going to explain. If you remember, we learned earlier that Gemara in the Chamidik Delim Mizu. The Gemara, the greatest is Gemara even over Mishnah and Mikra. So we're going to understand the similar context. So he says like this: Va'inyan hu. What's the inyan? So it says the Isa b'Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah considered by many as the first work of Kabbalah attributed to Avram Avinu, the book of formation. Some say Reziel HaMalach is attributed to Adam HaRishon, and that would be an earlier book. There are different opinions on that. So Sefer Yetzirah, which is cited quite often in Chassidus, very cryptic book, he says like this: Begimel dvarim bara es elamai. God created the world with three things, three ingredients, so to speak, three elements. Sefer, Sipur. Sefer means a scribe, Sefer means a book, and Sipur means the narrative. So when you write a book, for example, you write a story, we have three things. The one who's writing it, the Sefer, there's the book itself, and there's the narrative that it conveys. So he says, Sefer hu Sefer Torah. He Torah shebiksav. Sefer is referring to a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll. That's the written Torah. The Sipur hu, the narrative hu shemedabrim divrei Torah bal peh. So we tell a story, you say v'spartam, you're sharing a narrative. That's already telling the story. That's already as they speak divrei Torah bal peh, the oral Torah, not written Torah. The Torah tzivilonu Moshe bal peh. That Moshe told us, commanded us the Torah bal peh. So this Torah shebiksav is Sefer, Torah shebal peh is Sipur. Those are the first two. V'nimtza, Sefer v'Sipur, Torah shebiksav, Torah shebal peh. So the first two, Sefer and Sipur, the book. And the narrative is the written Torah and the oral Torah. What about Sefer, the scribe? Now we're talking about the person, the writer. He says, "V'sefer shu loshen mispar." That's from the expression mispar, like count, like measure, number. The next page, 1382. Like he brought before from the Gemara, Seferim ha'esis shebeteira, they actually count the letters of the Torah. So counting here again is not the counting. When a Sefer counts, he's counting, but it's because he's being precise and he's studying it. It's like poring over every letter. So he says, "Hu kamay memutze ben Sefer v'Sipur." That's like an interface, an intermediary between the first two, between the book and the narrative, between Torah shebiksav and Torah shebal peh. What does that mean? V'hainu shesefer ma'esis the Torah shebiksav. What does the Sefer do? He's studying Torah. He Sefer, he counts and studies the Torah, the letters of the written Torah and the Sefer Torah. Uma'ayinim, and he delves into it, and they delve into it. The Seferim do. Umedagdikin, and they are medagdikim. They are precision. What's the word? Precision is the noun. What's the verb for precision? I'm not sure. But anyway, bottom line is they analyze it to precision. And what do they analyze? Yes, yitura asis ubechasedis b'yasedis shebetera. That's what a Sefer does. Meaning, how you derive from Torah shebiksav, understand all the nuances, you actually have to analyze and dissect. That's a good word. Dissect the letters of Torah shebiksav. B'yisura asis, the extra words, that extra letter. What does that teach us? U'b'chasedis v'yasedis shebetera. So yisura asis means in general the extra letters, like a vav. Why is there a vav? Ve'ela hamishpatim. And some places it says ela without a vav. That's what a Sefer does. So he's like a mamutze. He's analyzing and dissecting the letters in Torah shebiksav. That's why it's called Sefer, in order to derive from it the lessons that Torah Sheba'al Peh offers us. So we say chaser v'yatir, letters that are missing, letters that are extra. This is a big part of how Torah Sheba'al Peh is developed through the letters of the Torah. There's other methods as well, but it's all about analyzing the letters and the words of the Torah. And according to the Sefer, the scribe, the sages understand comprehension and understanding of the letters that are written in the written Torah. Hu sheba b'sipur dvarim. That's what then comes by doing that. And now you have a narrative. You share what you derive from that. You said this letter teaches us so and so. So you have now Sipur Dvarim, a narrative of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of the oral Torah, Shulafarish, which comes to explain, it comes to interpret, and to explain the derech prat in detail. Kol mitzvah aksuva b'Torah shebiksav. Every mitzvah that's written in the written Torah, but the written Torah is bikitzer or beremes. It's brief and alluded to in that extra letter or missing letter or other precision of how words are written and phrased and so on. So that's why the Gemara says, Seferim, Seferim kol ha'esher shebetera. So it's not just they're counting numbers, they're analyzing and dissecting with precision every letter in the Torah to draw out the Sipur Dvarim. So essentially, Sefer then is a mamutza between the Sefer, the book, and the Sipur, and the narrative it tells us. Like, for example, let's say you read, just lahavdil, you're reading a book, and you can't understand all the details there. So you go to a master, Sefer, you go to a scribe, you go to an expert, he looks at it, and he tells you, this is what it means. So he's essentially helping you take from the Sefer and turn it into a Sipur. Whereas without that, the Sefer remains somewhat inaccessible or what's the word I want to use? Cryptic or hidden. The Kitzer and Beremes. Shadeishin v'lemdim min amikra. These sages, these scribes, they're deishin. They draw out. And they're deishin more than draw. They debate. They are deish. Interpret maybe more than interpret. A drasha, deish. It's interpret, but like more an interpretation.
Learn from, read between the
in-depth
lines.
Study, pouring over lamdim and study from the mikra, from the verse, from the written Torah. Kol halachas v'adinim bepratis. All the laws
investigating
and all the laws and all the edicts in detail. That's what they achieve. Yeah, all the words. Yeah, investigate is also part of it. Discovery, deliberate, delve into it, analyze it,
explain.
It's going to probably need a few English words to fully explain. You know, when you say dershin, the lamdim. But bottom line is that they study and they analyze and they're able to derive and learn and draw out from the mikra all the dinim bepratis, all halachas dinim bepratis. The hain is still talking about the Seferim here. The Sefer hamuchavonim la'amitis harotzen va'chochma hagonus v'nelam be'esis the Torah shebiksav. And they, because we're talking about experts here, masters, not just coming and saying theories. They're aligning. They're actually correctly, in a correct way, in a masterful way, of aligning and being mechaven, meaning that they are actually being mechaven, meaning they're precisely, accurately uncovering the true Ratzon to the true Ratzon and Chochma of Hashem, which is concealed, Hagonus, which is concealed, vanilla, which is Gonus, locked and concealed, the Asi is the Torah Shebiksav. In the letters of the written Torah. This is the process of what Torah Sheba'al Peh, true Torah Sheba'al Peh is. Now, there are things that the Bali Mishnah, they received these drushes from generation to generation, all the way back to Moshe. But like we're learning here in Talmud, however, there are many things that they have discovered through their own efforts. They did not hear from their teachers. Even Bali Mishnah, we said, there are also some things that they also so-called innovated. But it's no matter what, it's always, like he said, Talmud Vosig Osel Lechadash Nit L'Moshe Sinai. Everything comes from Sinai. The question is how hidden and how revealed it is. Some things were befedish spelled out, and some things were not spelled out. So this is what the Seferim do. So it's clearly a mamutza between Sefer and Sipur. I mean, in simple English, essentially what a teacher does. That's what a teacher does. The teacher shows you how to read the book and how to turn the book into a viable and living dynamic narrative, a dynamic story. In this case, a story of the halachas and the dinim, everything the Torah wants to convey. So that is a very precise description of Torah Sheba'al Peh. What does it mean, the oral Torah? What's oral about it? It means it's not written down, but it's hidden in the written words. Everything is there, but someone needs to draw it out from there.
And the scribe is the one, the writer is the one who draws it out.
I explained that scribe here does not mean just a writer. A scribe means a teacher.
Okay.
A scribe means a sage.
Okay.
The truth is, real scribes are also supposed to be scholars, but it's not just about someone who has a nice handwriting. A scribe is supposed to...
But you said they dig into on a granular level each letter. I mean that is more than
that's
just
what
writing
that's what a true
down.
scribe is.
Yeah.
When you say medivrei sofrim in Torah, you say a mitzvah medivrei sofrim. I mentioned before. Why do we say from the words of the scribes? Because they're not just scribes. They are these. We'll call them Torah surgeons. Like with a scalpel, as you said, on a granular level, they go into every detail. Exactly. That's what he said. That's the Seferim. So Seferim kol eish shabbatera. I mentioned an example like parents who know exactly how many children, so they know the number, but it's more than just number. It's the value and the meaning of every letter and every precise nuance. Umeitziim kol zeh, and going back to the language you used, and these Seferim, they draw it all out. Meitziim kol zeh. All of this they draw out la'oir b'gilui. They reveal it all now. They bring it to light. In the Ur Begili, B'yediyah, V'asoga, Ulamaisa B'pel Mamish. B'yediyah, perception, understanding, V'asoga, and comprehension, Ulamaisa B'pel Mamish. To the point that you could bring it into action, to actualize it, Pel Mamish. In other words, you look in the Torah itself, if you don't know the meaning behind every letter and every word, you may not be able to know how to implement it. But with the Sofrim serve the role of turning the Sefer into a Sipur that we can actualize, an actionable document, basically, as we learned earlier, what Mishnah and Talmud do to add to Mikra. And this power, Behem, that they have, Leda Sagonus, this power that within them, to know that which is sealed, or concealed by Isis in the letters, who the Hine Peter Sefer who Gamkin Shekesa B'sa Sefer. This also comes to explain why Sefer is also those that write the book, the scribes, the actual writers. Al Derech Mashal, in other words, he's now going to explain exactly what we were just addressing. So why is it called Sefer? Why don't you call him Chacham? Why don't you call him Deirish? You call him, we learned before different expressions, but Talmud Chacham, we learned before the Chachmei HaGemara, Chachmei HaTalmud. So he's saying, because this art that they're able to do also manifests itself in writing it down, and he's going to explain now. So it's not just a writer who's writing letters. While Derech Moshe, a case of Sefer, like an author, he's not comparing Sefer, he's going to call it an author. An author describes our authors, like someone who authors a book. In order to be able to write something down, it's not an easy prospect. We all know that. Writing requires a in-depth understanding, to know a profound or a good in-depth understanding. Hadak, the core power of intelligence, hadak, the subtle and the
Heitev
nuance.
hodek. Heitev hodek.
Heitev what?
Hodek. He's saying it in
Hodek,
davening also.
as in like intense, like we say a Talmud hoduk. Yeah. How would you
He's saying
translate?
it in the morning about Ketores that the Kohen had when he was grinding the Ketores. He has to say, Heitev hodek. Hodek heitev.
And how do they try? Hodek means very, like very intense, right? Like not just good, like very
Thin,
precise.
very thin, very
Okay, that's why I
intense.
said hodok from the word dak, from like
Yeah.
thin
Yeah,
as
but
in
haduk in Hebrew,
as in
modern Hebrew.
refined, as in
Mehad-
refined. But you
Right,
pronounce
but-
it hodek. You're right, not hadak. You pronounce it hodek, correct?
Mehadek is a stapler. It staples it together. Haduk tov. It's connected really tight, like glued together.
Okay. How's it translated in Siddur there in the Ketores?
I think it's
Like
I
when
think
you
it's-
mesh it together, you mesh it together so fine that it's haduku to each other. They're like cells are already intertwined.
I'm just asking
No,
how
no,
it's
no,
translated
no.
in the English Siddur.
No,
I think
not,
it means
not together.
grind.
It's very fine, refined, very fine.
Grind. I think it says grind. Hadak etev. Grind it well.
You're grinding it very, very thin, that every piece is
I understand. When
separate.
you could do something that's not ground properly and it's not very fine. Exactly. It could be still
Yes.
rough. And here it's a very in-depth type of immersion. Yes. Okay, good.
Granular.
Yeah. Hodok eich lahavi kol emek hasechel shalai. How to bring down, how to draw all the depth of the seichel, of his seichel, kamoisha hula mitose, the way it is in its resonating truth, but omke, in depth, v'rachve, and breadth, b'tzirufe asius, in combining the letters. In other words, it's not just an intelligence, it's also a precision. Like we just say, a good writer, I mentioned before, a wordsmith, Taylor's, every letter is accounted for. A really excellent piece of writing is not just conveying a good idea, but every letter is exactly the way it should be, precise. So grinding works very well here, yeah. B'tzirufe asis, the letters that he combines in order to convey the idea, sheyachilu es emek v'rechiv chachmose ba'atzme, that they should contain and convey the depth and the expansiveness, or the rechiv, the breadth of the Chochma as it is within him. So a person who's not such a good writer may convey an idea, but the idea is not conveyed in those letters that actually capture the whole depth that he has within him. That's why you'll sometimes find a person who hasn't written something so well, afterwards an editor or someone will ask a question and say, well, I didn't really fully express what I meant. Whereas with a Sefer, like he's saying here, a real author, a master author, is someone that the words are going to be so precise, so refined, so let's call it, they grind the idea down to the fine detail, that every letter is exactly precise in conveying the full depth of the idea. What he's adding here is that till now we're talking about Seferim as people who are precise in their way of analyzing the letters of the Torah. But he's now connecting it actually to authoring it. Why it's actually called a Sefer as a scribe, because that's what a scribe does. Now, you'll say every Sefer that writes today a Sefer Torah is on this level. I don't know. They are definitely supposed to sanctify themselves and prepare themselves to write Torah, but you can imagine when you have Sofrim like the Alter Rebbe or others, then it's a whole different story. They weren't just wordsmiths that sat down with ink and quill and had a nice handwriting. It wasn't calligraphers, let's put it that way. They weren't just artists. There are people who knew how to take an idea, because here we're talking about Seferim who are taking the letters of the Torah Shebiksav and putting and expressing it in a way in Torah Shebapeh, in the Sipur, with all this precision that he's talking about here. This is what an author does. So in order
He's
to
talking
write,
about an author,
in order to write something, you have to be able to achieve. Let me just finish 1 second. Let me just finish this. So the dafke b'tzirufim elu, and it's specifically in this combination of letters, this permutation. There's a lot of ways you can convey an idea. You could say it one way, you could say it another, but in a master writer, a master sefer, And not with other combination of letters. Because if you use different the wrong letters, it would then yita means would wander off, like it would be not consistent, would not be accurately conveying from the nekudas etzem haseichel. And this again, you see someone who doesn't always get it completely. When they convey the idea in writing, something's missing, and you'll go back. If you see this all the time. I mean, I remember a number of times when we wrote down a sikha from the Rebbe we heard on Shabbos, and once in a while the Rebbe would write, not often, but there were times he said that you missed my point. So you wrote it down, you didn't get it. Now, sometimes it's because we didn't choose the right words or we didn't fully understand it. But the point being is that this precision is meant to be accurate. The words are accurately conveying the idea perfectly, and not the wrong combination of words which wander off sheyita from the word like atiyah, wander off from the nekudas etzem haseichel, from the spark or from the
Yate.
Yeah, menekudas etzem haseichel, from the kernel of the core idea. Rak b'tzirufim elu is dafke in these combinations. Shekesa behem. That's what the real Sefer does, that he writes, the letters that he actually chooses to write, shebezen nimtze etzem chachmose k'moshehu. Is dafke in these precise words that you find the core idea, exactly as it is in its source. And that's the real art here. The real masterful art is the ability to take the idea as it is in its purest form and not dilute. It shouldn't be diluted or diffused or in any way distorted, accurately conveyed exactly in these words. And that's where you'll see an excellent writer is able to do that. You can see it, you feel it even. Sometimes I say, great piece of writing. What is the really saying? You're saying because the words are like the perfect words chosen to convey the sentiment, the feeling, the idea, the concept, etc. So this brings down to the author part. I mean, he's going to go now deeper into and going to further explain that in order to write like this, you need to go deeper into the Chochma. This is going to further explain what we said earlier, that Bina will add to Chochma, because the Sefer that's what the Sefer is doing. The Sefer is taking the idea and bringing it and conveying it in writing that combines this, that is the interface between the Sefer and the Sipur. So he's going to explain that he has to go deeper into the idea in order to write it this way. Like he started out, he says, in order to write, like we also, anyone that writes anything knows when you write something, you have to go far deeper into the idea than when you speak it or just know it through thought. There's nothing like writing. Writing forces you to really have to clarify it, and that's why it's so difficult. At times you sit down, you're ready to write something, you think you have it all in your mind, figure it out. You start writing and you get all kinds of blocks. Something is like that, and you have to therefore go deeper into it. That's what he's going to explain now. But I'll just stop here if anybody wants to ask anything about what we've learned here.
I just wanted to say something. It's sort of like the birur. It's like the clarity that you're getting. And
Absolutely. It's exactly that. Yes.
And I was thinking just this with the Rebbe's father's yortzeit, where he just he had so little space to write these amazing ideas in the margins of the book. That's an example, I would think, of this kind of thing.
Well, the Rambam says it about Mishnah, that the art of Mishnah was they were able to take these profound ideas and put it in such kitzur. He says, "Bekitzur," and they're able to capture. That's the real art, being able to capture the full idea in the exactly right words, whether it's brief or more at length. Absolutely, those are the best writers are able to do that. That's exactly right. I mean, often you'll see you review a book or a Sefer or something, you'll say it's very good, but far too long. You could have said the same thing in 3 pages instead of 30 pages. That's sometimes you need more explanation. But what did the Lahavdil Winston Churchill said? He wrote a long letter to his friend, and then he signed. And by the end, he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't have time to write a shorter letter."
Exactly. It's much more difficult to write short than it is to write long.
Absolutely, of course. And the same thing is speaking. You know, I could tell you when you do interviews 2 minutes, you don't have 20 minutes, you don't have 2 hours. You have to say something in just a short piece. You have to really concentrate. You really have to capture, the essence of it. Okay. So
This
that's
is what
interesting.
makes a writer for a writer. The ability to give it out in a clarity.
No, but now you understand why it's such a compliment when you say divrei sofrim. It's not just scribes who are nice, it's not just artists who know how to write nice handwriting, nice penmanship. You're talking about literally a surgical process of precision to this ultimate to this extent.
That's a good one. Word surgeon.
Yeah. I always say it whenever I describe how the Rebbe edited the talks that I prepared. I always compare him to a surgeon, like with a scalpel, a master surgeon with a scalpel, because he would take a word, how he would change one word, one nuance. It was unbelievable to see. Great editors really do that very well. They take what you wrote and they just sharpen it in a way that you say, wow, that's like I remember my agent always telling me a good editor doesn't add anything. He takes what you wrote and writes it better than you would have written it yourself.
Sharpen. It all goes with the surgeon and the sharp and the.
Yeah,
I have a
absolutely.
Sometimes you have the same
You see it all the time.
word, but in
you
a
ever see?
different order.
You ever see a good edit? You'd see a piece and then it was edited, really well edited. It's amazing how the same idea. I just actually did it a few days ago. Someone wrote something as a draft in my organization, and it was like 4 paragraphs. And because I had written it originally, I turned it 4 paragraphs into 3 lines and I went back and I didn't miss anything. Sometimes it really works well where you take something, you're just able to get rid of redundancies, or you find the right word that captures it. It's work, and it takes sometimes a lot of time to do that.
But you have to have the real understanding, like you do, of
No,
knowing
that's
what
exactly. If you don't have the understanding, then you're just going to grope for words and so on. Yeah, that you see immediately, the clarity shining through the words. Yeah, that you see. You talk about excellent writers are like that. There's the holiness, but on a very basic level, Tanya has a lot of that, where you see the Alter Rebbe's precision. Sometimes it's just awesome how he took a few words and the way he describes something gives you it's more than just words. You sense it, like in the beginning of chapter 32 in Tanya, where he says that the essence of love, v'ahavta, loving someone, is nafshe. He has to make us a nafshe iker v'gufei tofel. That anyone who makes materialism or their body more important and their soul secondary cannot truly love. That expression, nafshe iker v'gufei tofel, is an amazing expression, just 4 words. And he captures essentially that materialism divides and spirituality unites. But the way he says it, that's a perfect example of real, original, precise writing. Because it's not a pasuk in Chumash. I don't think it's anywhere in Maimar Chazal. Maybe there are expressions somewhere like that somewhere, but I have not found. And that I'm just giving, you could see someone who's so in touch with the concept, they find exactly the right words that it's almost like a sentiment. You almost feel it like a song. It's so poetic in that way.
Is this about the links between Chochma and Bina and the interactions between both, back and forth? Is that precise, that helps a person to express? You just said he takes the concept, that means he's engulfed in Chochma, and then draw into development the idea through Bina.
Well, he's been talking about Chochma and Bina. He hasn't yet connected it to those expressions, but it is essentially the idea, that Bina is digging deeper into the spark or kernel of Chochma to clarify and get this clarity. That is ultimately the general discussion here.
My question is the Chochma that's. Can you hear me, Rabbi?
Yeah.
My question is the last class we were talking about essentially the source of Chochma and how it's in Keser, and the very nuanced discussion about how an idea originates. And my question is, we know that Gomorrah is in Bria, and it's probing darkness. So the question is it revealing Chochma that's in the darkness, or is it drawing Chochma from above into the darkness? You understand? Of course, you understand the difference.
In order to, what the words he used were that in order to illuminate a place where there's confusion or questions or contradictions, you have to dig deeper into the source of the idea. Like we're learning right now, we're going to learn some more. He's going to discuss this now in more detail about what a writer does, exactly that. In order to bring that clarity to a place where there isn't clarity, you need to dig deeper in the very idea. If you just rely on the idea as the way it is, it won't be able to be understood for those that are either confused or unclear. In other words, if the Amoraim or the Soferim did not do their job, it would remain clear for those that are on that level of Chochmah, but it wouldn't be clear for anyone else. So you have to go dig deeper into the source of that very idea.
Right. So it is a hamshacha from above. Yes. At the end of the day,
I don't know.
process.
Let's not use the Hebrew confuses me, to be honest. I'm not sure what means hamshacha from above in your mind. To me, it means that you're digging deeper into the original idea in order to clarify things, and the only way to do that is by going deeper into it. Is that what you mean by hamshacha from above?
No. I mean, when you say dig deeper from the source is in Keser. The source of Chochma is in Keser.
Let's use simple English. Before we get to Keser and Chochma, let's use English.
Actually, there's a very bold implication. So you have the Amoraim who are doing this birur, okay? And
I'm saying let's speak about it in simple English without any Hebrew.
I'm trying to. I'm going to.
No Keser, no Chochma. Just let's talk about what a writer does when he tries to clarify an idea and he's trying to draw out an idea that can be communicated to people who can't understand the idea in its original form.
I understand. And here's the question, okay, to a skeptic, because I deal with a lot of skeptics in Northern California. So a skeptic
there are skeptics in New York too, just for the record.
Okay, I think there are more in California. But anyways,
okay.
So a skeptic might say, those are the Amoraim, really just the Rabbanim, they're coming, it's the whatever, the rabbinic line, okay? Essentially from the Prushim originally. Anyways, we'll say, okay, these are really good lawyers. These lawyers want to explain rules and they're drawing from Tanakh to support their arguments. They're super smart. They want to say it means this. And why? Because, I know this pasuk, this particular pasuk in this huge, whatever, a set of, verses, they're dafka revealing that which was already true. They're not making it up. They're not making up a rule. They're explaining the elokus inside this more, in this world, it's dark, it's cryptic. So they're drawing from elokus. It's a very big difference whether you're saying this is emes Torah, emes and from elokus, or the skeptic who says they're really good lawyers who are just making the rule and drawing a pasuk to support their argument. It's a huge difference.
Well, since you're speaking to skeptics, so let me respond. Since you're speaking to skeptics, I'm going to not use any Hebrew language at all. I'm not even going to use Torah language. I forgot who they were. They were the two big musicians, maybe Horowitz and another one. They're both big, great musicians who both played pianists, and they both played Beethoven. So one of them criticizing the other says, when you hear him play, you hear Horowitz play. When you hear me play, you hear Beethoven. So the point being is, when you see master writers, I'm using the exact example he's using here, master writers or master, Richard Feynman in physics. and others like that. What is their ultimate quality that they're lauded for is that not they came up with great ideas, that they took an idea that was there before, that was very cryptic and not understood, and they were able to adapt it or interpret it. And everyone says, wow, there's no question that resonates with the truth of the original. That's what we're talking about here. So without using any words of God, Torah, this is a concept that you find all the time. There are people who are masters, there are people who are not. And sometimes you see someone, I'm sure in the world of law, I'm sure you have mentors that you know when you go to them for advice or you learn from them, they just got it. They had something they had from experience. They were able to interpret the original, I guess, original
statute or whatever, or case decision
in a way that just someone who doesn't have the experience wouldn't. And someone else, something's off. So that's the way I would explain it right now for this practical purposes. So the Amoraim were not coming to innovate new ideas at all. They were coming to understand exactly that. Now, for this you needed, like we said earlier, both devotion, bittul, no arrogance, because of course arrogance or any self-interest would just get in the way. So if you want to talk about skeptics, they would say, well, how do I know their self-interest didn't get in the way? Or maybe it's their own interpretation. But that, I don't want to go. That's another discussion altogether about trusting rabbis and trusting authorities. Here we're assuming that we're talking about Sofrim, Divrei Sofrim, who are worthy of that name. They're not forgers and they're not deceivers, like many scientists unfortunately are, that they're truly dedicated to the truth. Because you have the same question in science. How do you know your conclusion? Maybe you forged your results. Maybe you forged your data or whatever it may be. But assuming that the person is honest and dedicated, so there's that that ability to go dig deeper into something that in the Mishnah is only, let's say, 5 lines, and take that one line in the Mishnah and wow, you say, oh wow. And then when you learn it, you realize, especially if you're an expert, that it's mechuvan, like he keeps saying, he said the word mechuvanim, lamitis harotzna v'achachma. They're mechavan. They're aligned with that. If they would come up with conclusions and one of their colleagues would say, hey, you know what you said is not based on, it's not accurately conveying what our teacher said. And they would argue about it until they got to a crystal clear place. So that's how I would explain. So if you want to use the language of Kesser and Chochma now, you can then apply, once you know speaking about in simple English, then you could say that's what we're talking about here. That Chochma Gluya on its own would be like the Mishnah. That's a clarity. Rabbeinu HaKadosh had that clarity, but his students didn't. Or the students of his students didn't. Because he said Rav and Shmuel still had it. But in some generation, they didn't have that clarity. So they needed to, and they started asking questions. They say, one second, one Mishnah says this, one other Mishnah says that. Like you said earlier, some things were cryptic, etc., etc. So now they had no choice. The only option was to dig deeper. And dig deeper in a way. That's essentially the response to the conservative or reform movement who say, one second, just like those sages dug deeper and applied and brought out new halachas, so are we. The problem is they're tampering with the original. And that was the reason they were rejected. You can't tamper with the original. Amoraim never changed the original. They interpret the original, and it has to be aligned with it. You cannot break, you can't go and say, because times are different, I'm going to change the original. That's the key, and that's where you need an expert. And the truth is, let's be honest, there are, even among called Orthodox rabbis or rabbis that are going with halacha, they will have disagreements. Someone will say you've gone too far off from the original. It's not accurate. And some will say he did. This is part of the discussions in halacha. That's why you have differences of opinions by rabbanim about many matters. Like for example, even why some people ride on a Shabbos elevator and some don't. There are differences in how they interpreted original texts that they compare to, precedents and similar situations. Not obviously, there were no elevators back then, but similar theoretical situations. And that is a big one, So the point, that's how I would explain it.
So, but I think...
Are they opening up Chochma Stima? Are they opening that up? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they're definitely drawing from there, yeah. Okay. That's what he says, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you.
I gave an example like this, striking the flintstone.
Right.
You draw out sparks you couldn't get otherwise. Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's the challenge. Listen, to put it in very simple, when a student challenges a teacher, it'll draw out more from the teacher to explain it. And that is definitely digging deeper into the kernel of Chochma. Yeah, all the way into Chochma Stima. Correct?
Beautiful. Thank you.
But you're revealing what is already there because
the question is, what means there? To use Bill Clinton's expression, is there? What does there mean? It's there, like I mentioned, one cell has all the cells, the 75 million trillion cells. Is it there? It's there, but it's still in a state that you can't really see it in any way. The bottom line is, he did say Dvarim Chadoshim, new things will emerge. The question is, what does new mean? Like we said, Kol Masha Talmid Vosik Asa L'Chadash Nitn LeMoshe Mesinai. If you took something you heard from me, and you were able to create a derivative of it, a new idea, but you say, you credit me as your teacher, that I actually say it? I may not have said it, but something that sparks some idea and it's aligned with it. It's a very, let's call it amorphous word when you say new. What does new mean? Is it completely new? Is it new application? Is it a new manifest? There's a lot of levels here.
They just newly expressed. It was there, but someone brought it out.
Yeah. But it could be new. If you ask the original teacher, he'll say, you know what? I never heard that. I never even thought of that. That's just fine, because it was in his Chochma Gluya, his Chochma Stima, he wasn't aware of, right? Exactly.
100%.
nothing under the sun.
Did we talk about why the Mishnah uses the Kohanim as pointing at the time?
We talked about it, a few pages back at the bottom.
Why did they choose to use Kohanim for pointing at the time?
So he brought the Gemara about, because it indicates that you wait for the time, not for the mikveh. At the bottom of page 1379, top of 1380, he spoke about it briefly. But it's really the Gemara in Brachos talks about it. They use the time because they want to show that it's not dependent on their action of going to the mikveh, kapara, but it's dependent on the time of the day. So that's when he says that. Anyway, I would refer you to the Gemara, talks about it in detail. But, okay. So let's read on a bit. Any other comments, questions? Let me just sum up how he's going to now add more to the process, be able to write with such precision and be mechaven and be aligned. He says like this, and we actually see. B'chush is always an expression that it's not just a theoretical thing. You could actually see it in real life examples. That when you express or commit to writing an seichel, an idea, the light, he's saying because the seichel is but when you commit it to ksav, it's like in a keli. Tzrichim lahales seichel el mekere. You need to actually take the idea and go back to its source. Not enough to just say, oh, okay, I heard someone say something and I wrote it down. You have to go back, el mekere, ayin ba'atzmei, and to delve within yourself, the person whose idea this is. In the resonating truth of the idea, from the power of its source. Now, in other words, not just the way it was expressed. So, for example, I may give a speech in Dibur, and then I want to write it down. It's not enough for me to just write what I just said. That's why you'll always see you have to edit it. And what are you doing? You're really going back to Koyach Mekere, HaShefeya Sasechel. That Shefeya that flows and essentially animates the Seichel. So when you really write something, that's what you need to do. Tahari Betchilu Hu Masigas Sasechel V'Hasbora or Hasvora V'Yedei Amitosim Etzad HaSoga. before he wrote it down, he understands, comprehends the idea and the hasbara probably. An explanation of Yedea mitase mitzad hasaga. And he recognizes its truth from on a comprehension level. How do you, so now, but in order to write it, how do you tzarich la'aleise lemoked haseichel? He has to elevate the idea back to the source of the intelligence, and to radiate within it from the source of seichel. In other words, it's not enough to what he understood, but he has to go back to the source of where that understanding came from. And then he could bring it down and commit it to writing. But Asius and letters with sirufim and combinations muchuvonim, aligned, meaning the proper alignment of the letters, that these words should actually convey the truth of the idea the way it is in its original. And that's very, very, anyone who's written knows this very clearly. There's something about writing that is just simply on a different dimension than the spoken word, and definitely beyond the thought, the words as they are in your thoughts. So initially you would think, if I understand the idea in my mind, what's the big thing? Let me just give a speech now, a lecture. And what's the big thing? I'll just write it down. I'll write a book because I have all the ideas in my mind. Try it out. It never works. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Because when you need to bring it down to that type of clarity, you need to go back to the original. And it's painstaking, actually, very difficult effort, and that's how it is. And I mean, I speak from personal experience. So what Rebbe Rashab says, Nira B'chush, obviously he sees it even more. That Ayin Beis itself is probably the best example of this type of writing, because look at the precision here. But this is what he's saying. So in other words, what we're getting here, I'm going to stop here, most likely. We'll stop here. Because he's going to go on. He's going to speak about this more. Thank God, he's elaborating pretty extensively on this. Bottom line, what he's doing here, he didn't use Chochma and Bina, but you see, he's going into this process that when you need to bring it down to writing into what he's talking here, the Sofer, the Sefer, from the Sefer into the Sipur, you need to go deeper into that, into the core, which is essentially what he said before, that Bina goes deeper into the source of Chochma as the time of the Talmud because of the concealments. But he's going to bring it all together. He's going to sum it all up. And he's going to talk about Moshe Rabbeinu and the other Sofrim, all the different generations. This will go for a good few pages. And it's well worth learning and reading. Okay, let me stop here. Middle of page 1382. Any other questions? Any comments? Great stuff, this.
It's wonderful. Could you say that last concept is that you write to know what you think? In other words, like, not to know.
I don't know if you write for that purpose.
No,
you may be writing for others to understand. But let's put it this way. If you write for yourself to know what you're thinking, you want to write it down, and you want others to understand it, there's no choice but to go back to the mouth of the well, so to speak. Right. You can't just rely on the flow of seichel that came from Dibura Machshava alone. You have to go back to the source. There's no question. I mean, I literally experience this every week when we would, after Chazara, we would I'd write down the highlights, like the bullet points, and then I start writing it out. I would always go back to my original notes or my original way of remembering to make sure it's anyone that has written knows this is like
so fast. It really is. I mean, this is
usually, I mean, if you write something down, you're usually writing it for someone else. I don't think any author is writing a book just for himself. I mean, you could do that, but the real effort is because you want others to understand what you're saying. I mean, you ever write notes for yourself? I write sometimes notes for myself, frankly, and I go back. I can't even understand my own notes.
No, what I'm saying is you sometimes when you write, you are further clarifying, like what the Rebbe says.
Oh, for sure.
And that's the process of further clarification where you go back to the seichel and the source, and you then further, expose, cover.
I'll just use a Chassidus applied example, which really does not fit here so well, but I think we'll get the point across. You know, we're coming out to Rosh Chodesh Elul. We all know the story of, I captured in my book, 60 Days, the story of love, betrayal, and reconciliation, right? Hashem gave the Torah, the Jews then built the golden calf, betrayal, and then Moshe has to go and dig deeper, literally, to get tshuva. Salachti kidvarecha, takes him 40 days to get the Torah, 80 days to gain forgiveness. Double amount of time, because he has to dig deeper now, because there was a breach, there was a violation. And he has to gain God's trust again. To gain trust after betrayal is much harder than the initial trust. And what does he do? He davens and he does everything he has to do to beseech God. So when he does that, he's discovering deeper dimensions of Hashem's love to the people and the people's love to Hashem, like we see even in human life. If a couple, after there's been a betrayal or violation or a breach of trust, find ways to dig deeper and make a deeper connection, they have reached, in the language we're learning here, into the Chochma stima. There, maybe it's Ava Mistima, maybe not Chochma, Ava stima, whatever the word is, Ava Misuteres. Because of the challenge, there was no choice. They had to do that. Had they not done that, their marriage may fall apart. So the challenge actually brought out a much deeper connection. I'm just showing this example really applies almost everywhere in life. That whenever you have a challenge, a pressure, a resistance, if you wish, there's no choice, but you have to dig deeper, and that's the only way to get there. So this is really, if you broaden it, it extends to almost every area in life.
Absolutely.
Again, I qualify my example because he's not talking about that here. Actually, that's more the conversation of Einoid al Mamat L'mayla through Tefillah. Here he's talking more in Torah, more in the intellectual process. But the concept is similar, that what we learn through the distress, through the darkness, or through tshuva, you reach greater than the tzaddik does for this reason. Just to drive the point home a bit more.
Totally wonderful. Beautiful class. Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah. We thank the Rebbe Rashab. I'm just trying to put it in the right words.
But there you go. You're doing it. You're doing the process.
I hope. I worked very hard on that, actually.
A good Sofer.
Whenever I get somebody write something and I have to edit it or look at it, I go back to the source, what they based it on. Now you'll see how often I ask, what's the source? I want to see the source. Not because I question the person who's interpreting it, because it's the only way to really see, is it aligned? And sometimes you go back to the source and say, okay, it was a very creative adaptation, but it's not necessarily accurate. Meaning, is it absolutely the way to explain it? And that's a very critical thing. To me, everything, I always try to align any idea. And even when I explain something, I go back again and again to the original. That's why you see how precise, what does the Rebbe Rashab actually say? Because it's so easy when you start the process of comprehension, when the processing can easily distort the absorption.
But I just want to say that to Yitzhak's point, I also think that is a very good way to counter the skeptics, because if you can always go back to the source, they can't go back to the source. They're just riffing on what they know.
Yeah, but the skeptics will say they don't trust the source either. I mean, if you really push them.
Well, why should they trust
why
do not the
skeptics I deal with will say, ultimately, I mean, whenever anyone asks me about the oral Torah, they'll say, okay, the oral Torah is, man-made, and we're also humans, we can interpret it differently.
Well, know what?
1 second. Then I say, I always go the other way around. I say to them, so what about the written Torah? No, the written I accept. I say, why do you accept the written? Maybe the written is also questionable. And then you're really questioning God. That's at the end of the day, it's about God. What did God intend? If God gave us the Torah and he told us, here are the teachers, interpret the Torah, you're ultimately really questioning God's methodology.
Sure.
So it usually ends up coming down to they don't trust the written Torah either.
Okay, so then I would say to them, when you learn as much as you, Rabbi, have learned, then let's have a discussion.
Yeah, but they don't respect that at all. I remember once in
Why?
a
Why
class.
couldn't they respect it? I don't understand.
Listen, Robin, we need today explanations. Look what's going on. People are brainwashed. They think they have a whole true narrative when then the whole thing is false. Look, I remember in a class once I gave in Manhattan, and I was explaining something, and there was one of these guys that was not just, I don't have a problem with skepticism if it's positive, constructive. But there was the guy just making everybody crazy. People were trying to quiet him. I wanted to hear what he had to say. But he kept on he was talking as if he's some big expert. Now, I wasn't there to pull rank. We weren't in the same league. I could tell you that right now. But that was not what my intention was. And I said to him, you're asking questions about thousands of years of Talmudic analysis and so on. If you were at a medical conference and doctors were positing different ideas, would you get up and say, hey, I have a different idea? And you have no medical degree. You never read a medical book. You're not a doctor. So he was insulted. He said to me, why do you compare? I said, because with all the medical books that are out there are more Torah books by far. And you're not even respecting this body of literature. Now, he couldn't accept that because he was too arrogant. But that was the truth. I'm just pointing that out.
Yeah, totally. Some people
you
just
see
can't.
people, they start talking, they start spouting ideas, and now you don't want to insult people. You want to respect everyone, but sometimes a person doesn't even. There's an expression in Hebrew, "Maker es mekaymet." They don't recognize their place. They're like he's speaking to scholars, and you're like a little kid, and you think you're an expert on something you have no clue about. But you want to always explain it. It's hard to tell that to someone who thinks they know it all. What do you do? Yitzchak, do you have any ideas?
It's a difficult one. Keep trying.
Because you don't want to insult anyone. You don't want to demean them, but sometimes it's.
Well, usually those types of people are not actually going from the source, or they're taking a little tiny bit from the source and they're riffing. They're just totally going off on their own tangent. And then if you challenge them with, but that's not really what the source means, then you show the folly of their way. They're just using it as a hook to say what they think, their personal opinion, usually.
Yeah, but a lot of them won't admit that. They don't have the intellectual honesty to admit that,
Yeah, that's a separate problem, but that's the problem of the modern era, the elevation of self, right?
I've heard someone quote.
I have this all very often myself. I've done it in this class. There are many times I'll say I have to go back and study it, and I need to look inside. I can't I won't riff unless I'm confident. Or I'm pretty sure about the idea. But it's just not an intellectually honest place. You go back, and sometimes you go back and you find out that you got it wrong, or you misread it, or you read a different. But you don't have intellectual honesty, you're getting nowhere, really.
100%. I was just going to say that's what it comes down to.
I've heard someone say, quote, "Ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher lo yechata," or whatever that quote. I can't remember the exact words. Exactly. So and they use it to say that, oh, the Rebbe could be wrong. Like, he said it, but maybe he wasn't right. Or I have a hard time. I mean, I know that anything the Rebbe says is true, but how do you answer that?
I don't answer that to people because you know it because you already have inside you that conviction. But if you did not have it, can someone just convince you? Even if you respected me and I said to you the Rebbe is infallible, but if you haven't arrived at your own, you'd say, okay, I respect your faith. I'm not there yet. So I tend to not try to convince people to have the faith if they don't have it yet. You have to be able to explain. I mean, people will say, depending who it is, if it's just an unhealthy skeptic who wants to just challenge and they're going nowhere, So
No,
if you
it's someone who
recognize
wants
that,
the
you
truth
just,
and
so
wants to know that.
I would not. I would do what the Rebbe did. People ask the Rebbe, "Can he make a mistake?" And the Rebbe's answer, or some people ask the Rebbe, "Can he do a miracle?" And his answer was always the same. He said, "I cannot vouch for what other people say about me, but I will say that there are tzaddikim in history that were infallible." And he would explain why. How could a human being be infallible? That's really the question. If it's a healthy skeptic, the question is not whether the Rebbe is infallible. First, let's talk about, is it possible for a human being to be infallible? So that's a very important question.
And
because
is it?
God, well, so how would you answer that? I mean, I can give you my answer. It's a longer answer, but it's a problem because listen, Adam and Chava, they ate from the Eitz Hadas, and so remember that the pasuk that you referred to, Ein Tzadik ba'aretz asher yaseh teva layech, that means there's no tzaddik on earth that did good and has not sinned. The word yechta, Chassidus brings, can also mean from the word chesaron, not an actual sin, but not complete. So there, that is true. As long as Mashiach is not here, Moshe Rabbeinu reached 49 gates of Bina, but he didn't reach the 50th. The Rebbe himself said he didn't bring the Geula. So you could also say chet from the word that it was not complete. It's not you haven't reached the highest level that you should have or could have reached. So that, you could say, that's not about fallibility. That's more about simply a world that is, until Mashiach is here, we don't have perfection. So the issue of fallibility is a very big one. I think we have the time right now for me to go into my way of explaining it. I have discussed it on my life Sunday night programs quite a few times. Well, a few times. I don't know, quite a few times for sure. But it goes back to, did Hashem give a part of himself to any human being that through their bittul, they can have a piece of God's infallibility? That's what you have to, that's the way I would approach it. In other words, you say the Rebbe, let's not talk about let's talk about Rabbi Akiva. Let's talk about the Tanoim Amoraim. Could they make a mistake? If they can make a mistake, so everything we're learning here, what do you mean they're mechaven to the emes? Maybe they weren't. That would be a skeptic's question. Maybe they came away with a conclusion that was wrong. How do we know that they're 100% right? We're not talking about something they were makabel from Moshe Rabbeinu of Sinai. Hashem himself said. Something so there you have to go back to that Hashem gave us through Bittul and Mesiras Nefesh, we're able to channel a certain element of the infallibility of God's wisdom. Remember, infallibility doesn't mean that they are perfect in the sense where, listen, they all passed away, nobody's alive, so that means there's something that in their lives that is not complete. They didn't live forever. So even on that level, even whether it's their fault or not, that's another discussion. But it's a bigger topic, as you can see.
There's a question in the chat box from, I don't know, it's YI, I don't know what's his nickname for it, but he's asking, did Moshe Rabbeinu make a mistake? The Torah says he did, although it's beyond us. And then the next sentence he says, the Torah and Chazal say Moshe sinned. Is the Rebbe greater than Moshe? So he's coming on these topics. I don't know if you want to comment on these things.
Well, it's the same topic. Moshe, he's probably referring to when he hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock. That's probably what he's referring to. So the word mistake is a very, very amorphous word. That a person did not live up to the full potential. I just said Moshe Rabbeinu gained 49 gates of bina, of understanding, but not the 50th gate, and that's why it was called Chayla. Chayla is gematria memtes. Chayla is gematria 49. But his Chayla is very different than, God forbid, a cancer patient in a hospital. My point being, a lack of something can be called also a form of chet. The bigger topic, anyway. The point being is, well, I'm not talking now about people not being complete. We're talking about fallibility. That Moshe Rabbeinu, just because he spoke to the rock, he hit the rock instead of speaking, do we say that we can't trust the Torah that he shared with us? God forbid. We say absolutely Torah emes, Moshe emes, v'Torah emes. Vayiminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe avdei. Moshe is compared to believing in God. Now, obviously, he's a human being, he's not God. That we know. And therefore, he's not perfect like God is. But because of his bittul, God allows God's wisdom to flow through him in an infallible way. That's the way I would put it. Not because he is infallible, but because of his bittul, the God's Torah, that's what Hashem chose. You show the right bittul, Hashem will allow his emes to flow through you. To me, that's not so controversial. You just don't have bittul people like that. That's the problem. But if you have that type of bittul, why is that a problem? I mean, it's like, why do I trust someone? Not because they're great, because they're humble. That's why I trust.
You make the keli. He had the keli, and so that's why he was able to receive.
Yeah.
Same fellow wants to understand why was Moshe punished. If I don't know,
Okay,
he's
so
making
this class is an Ayin Beis, and I try to focus on what we're learning here. You could submit a question to the mylife.com where I answer all types of questions. I can't really go into all the questions here, especially in the context that we're recording the class. So the questions, let's put it this way, because I always say the question is legitimate and deserves an answer. The question is where and what context should that answer be given. So I'd prefer it to be outside of the scope of the Ayin Beis class, unless it's relevant directly here.
You could also make an appointment with Rabbi and have a personal discussion about this.
Sure, as time allows. But the easiest way, listen, I see some of you, I don't know who, but people post all the time questions on Ayin Beis. I don't really address them Sunday night so much, but I see plenty of questions come in, so which I'm happy to see. At some point I will address it.
And it was a wonderful class. I have to run, but this was phenomenal, Rabbi. Thank you for your extra time and really being a darshan, mefarish, what we're learning.
Very deep, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So let me stop here. Let me just